was 1944. In England, preparations were underway for the massive Allied invasion of Europe, D-Day. But before D-Day could have a chance to succeed, Hitler's Fortress Europa would have to be softened. German factories were running non-stop, and in order to crush the Nazi capacity to wage war, the Allies had devised a daring but potentially disastrous strategy. It was decided that the British Royal Air Force would pound Germany at night, using the darkness as their covering escort. This tactic lowered their risk from the Luftwaffe fighters, but also reduced their bombing accuracy. To the Americans fell the task of precision bombing during the day. The Americans' B-17 and B-24 bombers could carry heavier loads than the smaller British planes, and both the Flying Fortress and the Liberator were heavily armed. They bristled with machine guns. But the American planes were slower moving, and their pilots needed to hold steady courses in order to bomb with the needed accuracy. They were extremely vulnerable to the fast enemy fighters. And worse, the bombers were alone when they flew deep into Germany. No fighter existed in the Allied arsenal that could fly that far, fight, and still return to England. The Luftwaffe command knew this and would hold their attacks until after the escorts, P-47s and P-38s, reached the end of their range and had turned back. Then the Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs would swarm in on the lumbering bombers like angry hornets. As a result, bomber losses exceeded 20%. During those dark days of the war, better than 1 plane in 5 failed to return from each deep mission. The Germans were hurting from the day and night bombing, but the price was horribly high, and there were rumors of devastating secret weapons being developed by the Nazis in underground factories. Time was running short, and debate raged about the wisdom of daylight bombing without adequate escort. The fate of the upcoming invasion, the outcome of the war itself, was in serious doubt. Ironically, the plane that saved the day was an American-built fighter originally designed for the British. It was during the cold winter of 1944 that the mighty P-51 Mustang first flew as long-range escort for the B-17. A member of the German High Command, leading an attack on a box of American bombers, later recalled his dismay when, instead of turning back as expected, the American escorts pounced on his attacking Messerschmitts. He and his men were driven off without firing a single shot at the bombers. As the waves of flying fortresses continued on to their targets unscathed, Hermann Goering, commander of the vaunted German Air Force, was then convinced the war was lost. From that point on, Goering believed that the Third Reich was in its death throes. Only time and the loss of many lives remained before the final defeat. The Mustang quickly became a legend. The men who flew her, the fighter pilots, became heroes. Day after day, these daring men flew alone into combat, man to man against Germany's best. And much more often than not, the Mustang pilots came home the victors. We joined a group of former Mustang pilots at their biannual reunion, held in 1987 in Dayton, Ohio, hometown of the Wright brothers and considered the birthplace of aviation. The men and their families were guests at the Dayton Air Show, a spectacular exhibition of aerobatics and historic aircraft. In 1944, the 356th Fighter Group of the 8th Army Air Force consisted of 3 squadrons, the 359th, 360th, and 361st. At full strength or maximum effort, the group could field 60 aircraft plus 6 spares. The 356th was formed in December 1942 and originally equipped with P-47 Thunderbolts. They sailed to England in August 1943 and were assigned to permanent base at Martlesham Heath in Suffolk, along with headquarters and support squadrons. Their plane, the P-47 Thunderbolt, was a savage fighter and an excellent machine. However, because of its fuel-gobbling circular engine and poor aerodynamic design, the Thunderbolt had a limited range. In those early days of aircraft design, aerodynamics was an infant science. Range was not considered all that important for land-based defenses, and airspeeds were not high enough to punish an aircraft with a non-aerodynamic shape. However, for long-range escort, fuel consumption and distance were mathematical losers in the battle between power, weight, and drag. Even so, members of the 356th scored well when they were able to engage the enemy. Then, in November 1944, the 356th was presented with 9 brand-new P-51D Mustangs, the first to arrive at Martlesham Heath. After checkout and practice, the 356th flew their first Mustang mission on the 20th of November. Don Strait was the group's highest-scoring ace with 13.5 kills. Now a retired Lieutenant General of the Air Force, General Strait spoke with us about the changeover from Thunderbolt to Mustang.
All my life I wanted to be a fighter pilot, and after I enlisted in the Army Air Corps in 1940, I had a chance to do some flying as an aerial gunner, and shortly after that I had a chance to go to flight school and learn how to become a pilot in the Army Air Force. After I graduated and checked out in the P-47, I was assigned to the 356 Fighter Group, and after some training in the States, we were sent to Martlesham Heath in England, where we joined the 8th Air Force as a part of their fighter force. After flying the P-47 for approximately a year and a half in combat, we changed over to the P-51 Mustang. Oh, the Mustang is a real fighter pilot's dream. It's a fairly light airplane. At the same time, it's highly maneuverable. The cockpit is small, so when you sit in it, you feel like you're an integral part of the total airplane. It has good characteristics. It lands well, takes off well, carries a good load, and the important thing about it is it has a highly efficient engine. During World War II, we had the Rolls-Royce Merlin, which was a version of a British engine in the Mustang, and it was able to give a very good fuel consumption rate.
The Mustang story is a story about necessity, ingenuity, and determination with a dash of genius. The genius was provided by James H. Kindelberger, an aircraft engineer who was also president of North American Aviation. Dutch Kindelberger had learned the aviation business from such pioneers as Glenn Martin and Donald Douglas, and had been instrumental in the development of the DC-2 and the famous DC-3 airliners. However, Kindelberger was more interested in designing military aircraft, especially fighters. He took over the reins at North American in 1934. And in 1937, Dutch made a long sales trip to Europe. While there, he observed the Germans as they designed and built sleek new fighters for their growing Luftwaffe. Dutch saw that the Germans were years ahead of America in fighter plane technology. And when he returned to the United States, the Mustang was already under development in his agile mind. In 1940, an RAF delegation came to America seeking to replace their embattled Spitfires and Hurricanes with Curtiss P-40 Warhawks. The Warhawk was a tough bird, although considered obsolete by 1940. But Britain was in the midst of a vicious struggle, and the United States had not yet entered the war. The RAF needed planes fast. They reasoned that the P-40 was better than nothing and could be used for reconnaissance and ground support, thus freeing the Spitfires and Hurricanes for desperately needed interceptor work. Unfortunately, the Curtiss factories were already working at full capacity, trying to fill the U.S. Army's need for P-40s. Desperate, the RAF tried to persuade Kindelberger to build P-40s for them under subcontract to Curtiss. Kindelberger refused to build someone else's airplane, but Dutch was a shrewd gambler as well as a proud engineer. He offered to design and build an entirely new fighter plane for the British, from scratch and in less than 120 days. The RAF agreed, and 117 days later, the first P-51 Mustang was introduced to the world by North American Aviation. Designated the NA-73X, the prototype was first flown on October 26, 1940, and was the result of Dutch's German-inspired ideas gleaned from over 2 years of lessons learned in the skies over England and Europe. The Mustang was the first American fighter to be designed specifically for the requirements of World War II air combat. Jim Sullivan of Dayton, Ohio, was one of the many engineers who helped to design and perfect the P-51. Sullivan worked for United Aviation Products, a small subcontractor that had been called upon to design and build two very critical components of the P-51, its oil temperature regulator and its radiator. As Sullivan and his fellow engineers discovered, the Mustang's cooling system was an especially difficult problem.
Well, we were approached by the engineers from the Air Force and the North American to develop a radiator for aircraft. I don't think it was called 51 at the time, but it was X something. I think it was X-73. Up to this time, all the oil coolers that we developed were circular, but this particular cooler was to be a elliptical cooler, which he had never designed before. The original design, as I remember, was to have the 51 get right down on the ground with the troops. So when we examined the aircraft, we found out that due to that elliptical cooler and this square radiator behind it, built right underneath the plane, when the plane strafed any kind of ground fire or even picking up rocks and so forth down that low, would penetrate the tube and fin radiator and cooler, and the fluid would disappear, would run out, and the plane would, within 90 seconds, I think, would hit the ground. So once we found out what the problem was, we designed the coolant into I think 6 or 7 equal parts, where if you shut out one part, we had a little spring valve would come down and just shut that part off, and the other 6 would work. In the first part of the war, the English were sort of overrun, and their pilots would fly almost 24 hours a day, and they had a habit of leaving their planes out at night, and it would get cool, and the pilots would get the alert, and they would jump in their plane, put the pressure to the oil cooler, and due to the fact that the center of the oil cooler was congealed, it was very difficult to get the thing started. In fact, it would end up blowing out the oil cooler. So I figured out a deal where we'd come in, instead of coming straight down, we would come in by the side and go, instead of going up and down like the cooler did, we would come around and in the middle instead of coming around. And that way we'd hit the congealed oil right in the middle and warmed it up. People don't realize prior to the war we had no aircraft industry. We had to kind of learn on the job, so to speak. And the 51, it was just had a kind of a spirit of its own, and it made you a star.
The new fighter quickly contributed to the British effort both as a recon plane and in ground support. But when former ace Eddie Rickenbacker suggested replacing its Allison engine with the more powerful Rolls-Royce Merlin power plant, the P-51 blossomed into the greatest fighter plane of its time. The big 1,500 horsepower Merlin provided much more power than the Allison. That meant a big increase in speed, climbing ability, and ceiling, the 3 most important requirements for a successful fighter plane. Now, suddenly, the Allies had available a flying gun platform that could outfly and outfight any German prop-driven fighter. The Merlin engine complemented the P-51's aerodynamic shape, the signature of which was the big air scoop on her belly and wide laminar flow wings, ideal for high speed and long range. The Army Air Corps moved forward to equip its forces with the trim new fighter. The P-51 was a superb aircraft, but not without its flaws. Her streamlined shape meant high speed, but also necessitated an unusually long landing strip. This problem was alleviated by the addition of wide flaps to the wings that provided extra drag when lowered. Ditching in water proved to be just about impossible due to the distinctive air scoop hanging from the Mustang's belly. Even the P-51 manual advised pilots to bail out if in trouble over water, rather than risk instant sinking. The pilots of the 356th, combat experienced and eager to see action over Germany, welcomed the changeover from Thunderbolt to Mustang. Their mission became deep escort for the 8th Air Force's daytime bombing attacks against the Nazi heartland. Captain Charles Beck of the 361st Squadron recorded over 280 flying hours, mostly in his P-51, nicknamed Pat.
So I joined them in August of 1944. Continues to roll that airplane. We had that bigger, heavier airplane at the time, the Thunderbolt, and then in about November we changed over to P-51s because the big, heavy one wouldn't fly as far. My most memorable years are flying with the 356 fighter group and, of course, the 361st Fighter Squadron. Bought myself a P-51 because I couldn't stand it any longer, and raced it at Reno and Mojave and sold it to a doctor up north of Sacramento, and he sold it to somebody that's over in Switzerland now. I loved it. I mean, it's a good airplane. You don't use up a whole lot of fuel. The round engines, you gobble up about twice as much fuel as you do in the 51 inline engine. And it was a very dependable airplane. I mean, it was, I shouldn't say it's low maintenance, because our maintenance people had to work pretty hard on them when you're overseas because they got a lot of damage. And it wasn't the fault of the maintenance they got the damage. It just happened the pilots were in the wrong place at the wrong time or the right time, depending on whether you're the enemy or not. But basically, they're a very, very good airplane, and that's why you see so many 51s still left, and very few other World War II airplanes are left.
More than 15,000 P-51 Mustangs were built by North America, and they flew in every theater of operation. However, it was in the European theater that the P-51 really came into its own. A study of World War II strategies, later commissioned by the White House, declared that precision, daytime bombing of Germany was the single most important factor in deciding the outcome of the war. It was the Mustang that swept the German skies clean of enemy fighters. Their efforts enabled the bombers to reach and destroy their targets without running the horrible gauntlet of ME-109s and FW-190s that once lay in wait for them. The P-51 combat record is astounding, especially for a plane designed, built, and tested in only 117 days. In 213,873 sorties, Mustang pilots were credited with 9,081 enemy aircraft destroyed, more than half in air-to-air combat. The 356th Fighter Group accounted for 276 confirmed kills and more than 200 enemy aircraft probable or damaged, against only 112 of their own planes destroyed or damaged. This kind of success helped to destroy the Luftwaffe, but equally crippling to the German war effort was the damage wrought by Mustang pilots when they ran out of German planes to shoot down. The 356th alone destroyed more than 350 locomotives, 1,500 rail cars, and well over 500 vehicles. This was in addition to countless barges, tugs, flak towers, and virtually anything they spotted wearing a swastika. For the fighter pilot, war was often a fierce competition, a life or death challenge filled with constant danger and excitement. If it is true, as has been said, that a man is never more alive than when facing death, then to be a fighter pilot in combat was to be truly alive. However, behind the fighter jockey's devil-may-care attitude and mystique lay a pair of sharp eyes, a will to win, and countless hours of preparation and practice.
It's a very technical activity. I mean, you have to really know your airplane. You have to understand the mission. You have to know your geography, because we couldn't use radio aids over there. Everything was done by visual view of the Earth, and we had to know our geography of the European continent so we could get to our targets and get home again. And of course, you're flying at high altitude, and you continually have to be on the alert. You have to keep your head on the swivel in order that somebody doesn't come out of the sun or something, and next thing you know, you're shot down. Combat was really, I considered it a lot of fun because it was a challenge, and I'm a very competitive person by nature, and it was me against somebody else, and so it's like playing a good tennis match or playing a good golf match individually. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. Now, there's a lot of hazards to it, too, but you have to accept those and be sure that you are properly prepared as an individual and take advantage of everything that you have. Your altitude, speed, cloud cover, your knowledge of the geography, your knowledge of the capabilities of the German pilot and his airplane, and try to continually seek the initiative and seek the advantage.
Preparation and competitive spirit are critical to the making of a good fighter pilot. Equally important is the quality and maintenance of his aircraft and practice. Here, the Allies' plentiful fuel supplies and the Germans' lack of it became important factors. Limited fuel meant limited airtime and limited training. As a result, many hundreds of German pilots paid the ultimate price for their deficiency in this area. General Strait spoke with us about the nature of air-to-air combat against the Germans.
As far as I was concerned, the P-51 was a superior airplane to the Focke-Wulf 190 or the Messerschmitt 109. The airplane was extremely maneuverable. It had good in-flight level speed. It also had a good rate of climb, and it had a good gun sight and a good armament system. So consequently, I think we had a good advantage over the Luftwaffe because number one, we had a very experienced fighter force. Most of the pilots that were over there had a considerable number of flying hours, and whereas the Germans were really hurt because of their lack of fuel, the fact that their losses were extensive. That consequently their experience level in their airplanes was not as high as it would have been, or it could have been under other circumstances. So the Mustang and the combination of a highly trained pilot, I felt was a great match for anything that the Luftwaffe had. Even though I highly respect the Focke-Wulf 190 and the Messerschmitt, they were good airplanes. The biggest problem we had over there was weather. Weather in the British Isles and across into Europe in the wintertime is atrocious. It's terrible. And you can expect all kinds of conditions. Sometimes on our way home to England, we were diverted to land in France after the Allies got on the continent because we couldn't land in England. The weather conditions had deteriorated so badly. So you had to really pay attention to the weather, and because the weather could really trap you. And we didn't have good landing aids of the type they have today, so that you can land under all weather conditions. We had little or nothing. You had to be extremely wary on ground targets that you broke off your attack in order not to fly through the debris in the event of an explosion, because it could very easily knock your airplane down. Angle of attack is important. The steeper, the more accurate you are. The flatter, the less it is. The flatter you are to the earth, the more difficult it is to hit things because you've got to allow more bullet drop and so forth. But the angle of attack is very important. You should never fly down the column of the train. That's the worst thing in the world. You should fly across at 90 degrees and always aim for the engine, because that's once you shoot the engine, the train, it stops. So we had to be careful of trains because lots of times the Germans would put flak cars on them, and they had a lot of small automatic weapons on them, and they could be very difficult if you ran into a train that was heavily defended.
Captain Ray Campbell arrived at Martlesham Heath in October 1944. He rose from pilot to assistant operations officer, whose job, when not flying missions, was to test new and repaired aircraft for airworthiness. Now a retired contractor in Cleveland, Ohio, Captain Campbell describes a typical escort mission.
You get up rather early, anywhere from maybe 6 o'clock, 5 to 6 o'clock, have a breakfast, and then you would meet in the ready room, as they call it, of your squadron. Your leaders had met previous to this time, and they knew where we were going, etc. The intelligence officer would have the map. We had a whole wall in the ready room that had the entire map, part of England where we were stationed at, English Channel, and of course all of Germany. France, naturally, where we would cross over, Holland, etc. They would have lines drawn on there, usually with yarn, and would lead into where we were going. Say, for example, we were going to Munich. We would cross in at a different place. Maybe we would come down and come back into Munich, maybe from a different angle instead of coming in straight. They would give us the times that we would meet our box of bombers that we were going to protect. We'd have start engine time, takeoff. And when we were at this meeting, we could hear the bombers that we were going to protect. They were taking off already, and they were flying overhead, forming up, so that we always got a few extra hours sleep because the bombers had to get up a little earlier than we did. We would get our gear on, put the chute on, the G-suit. We wore G-suits. We carried 45s, shoulder holster. They would take us out to the aircraft in jeeps, and our crew would be there. Can't say enough for the crew. We had each plane had a crew of 3, crew chief, assistant crew chief, and armor. We would start engines at a certain time. We would taxi out. You had a specific order to taxi out to the strip. We would take off in 2s. You had number 1 was the leader of the flight. Number 2 was his wingman. 3 was the element leader. And number 4 was his wingman. We flew what you would call a finger formation. It'd be just like your 4 fingers. Here would be 1, his wingman 2, the element leader 3, and the wingman 4. This would be close formation. When we would cross over into enemy territory or meet our box of bombers, we would spread out into what we called a battle formation. And again, it would be a finger formation. Again, these 2 being the element, 1 and 2, and 3 and 4 being the other element. We would pick up our box of bombers several times. In fact, most of the time we would have maybe 2 or 3 or 4 boxes to protect. We would fly sometimes. We would be the lead squadron, and we would be the sweeping force, which meant we would fly ahead of the bombers and make huge S's going back and forth, therefore sweeping the area, so to speak. Then there would be a squadron which would be what they called close escort. They would be above the box of bombers, and they would make S's, but they would be a little shorter, more or less protecting the flanks. Now, then we had what we call close formation, and they would be, say, the 3rd line of defense. They would make shorter S's over their box of bombers, and they, as I said before, would be the 3rd line of defense. You can see how this would work. If enemy aircraft did come through, they would be hit by a squadron that was doing the sweeping. Anything that got by would be hit by the 2nd one. Anyone that did manage to get through would be hit by the 3rd. So one thing about our group, by the way, is that we had an excellent record as far as bomber losses. We lost very few bombers because this was our primary concern, was to protect the bombers. Once the planes reached the target, of course we had what you could call a grandstand seat. We would pull away from the target and actually fly around it, and the box of bombers would start their bomb run. You did have to admire a bomber pilot because he flew just straight and level, and once they started their bomb run, they had no evasive action whatsoever. They just went into really the teeth of the flak, so to speak. And there was a lot of flak. We would observe and see. We would see bombers get hit, and we would see bombers go down. Once they completed their bomb run and they came off of the target, then we would escort them back. Sometimes we could leave them, sometimes they would give a squadron permission to drop down to the deck, to leave the bombers and to drop down to the deck and to hit anything that might be down there. In other words, if we found an airfield, if we found any planes flying, if we found any trucks or things such as that, we had permission to strafe them. And of course, fighter pilots looked forward to this because it was a chance to use their guns again and a chance to just be a little more active with it.
The group's first mission to Berlin came on December 5th, 1944, and was a tremendous success. On that day, 4 pilots from the 356th, including Captain Campbell, scored doubles.
We were just a little east and north of Berlin when we ran into a group of approximately, I think there was maybe 120 FW-190s. Our particular squadron, the 361st, we were in the lead, and we had the altitude on them. I'd say we were maybe 3, 4, maybe 5,000 feet above them, and this was strange. As we were moving east and they were coming west, all of a sudden they made a turn, and they turned really right into us. I don't know if they didn't see us or what. And by that time, when they turned and started to go east, we were ahead of them, and we were almost coming in out of the sun. It was almost a textbook approach. As they were coming here, our squadron came. We turned left, we came down onto them, and we turned here and we came in. And of course, we were coming down then in twos, because in a battle you would break up with your leader and your wingman, and you would come down in pairs, so that we really knifed them as we came through. I came down, I got one of my sights, and as I used to tell you, get in close. We got as close, and of course you were eager, and we fired, and we got hits on him, and he did a snap roll, and then burst into flames and went down to the left. Another one came into view. I went down after him. He pulled up, joined another FW-190 who was chasing a P-51. The P-51 broke out. The one guy went into a cloud, the one that was chasing him, and I hit the other one that was trying to catch up with him, so to speak. I got some hits on him, and then he turned and rolled, and I followed him down into the clouds. And he jettisoned the canopy and bailed out. So, of course, missed the pilot, but he lost the plane, of course, so you would get credit for that.
The last mission of the war for the 356th Fighter Group was flown on May 7th, 1945. This was also to be the last Mustang mission of the European theater, to fly escort for B-17s, dropping leaflets on Germany. For the 356th, the war was now over, and most of its members would soon be returning to the United States aboard the Queen Mary. The unit was deactivated on November 10th, 1945, after being credited with 6 group battle honors, 3 distinguished unit citations, and scores of individual battle honors. After the German surrender, the mighty Mustang went on to become the primary escort fighter for B-29 raids against Japan. Its success there helped the United States achieve complete air superiority over the Japanese mainland. The Korean War caught the Air Force in a severe jet shortage. Fortunately, scrapping orders for the Mustangs had not yet been carried out, and 750 P-51s were taken out of mothballs, overhauled, and sent to Asia. They were joined by another 700 Mustangs called back from the National Guard units. In Korea, the Mustangs were a stopgap measure. They were used mostly for ground support and holding the line until enough jets could be delivered to take over the job. Also noteworthy in the P-51 story was the introduction in Korea of the F-82 or twin Mustang. Only 270 of these unusual planes were built, but they did quite well. Essentially, the F-82 was a hybrid aircraft, formed from two Mustang fuselages, lengthened and joined at the wing and tail, much like the Lockheed P-38 Lightning. However, the P-51 engines gave the twin Mustang a top speed of over 470 miles per hour and a range of 2,200 miles. The F-82 was an effective weapon against enemy ground forces and also scored several kills against Korean MiGs. The Mustang earned her reputation in savage combat during World War II, but it was a unique combination of men and defense that kept the P-51 alive and fueled the Mustang legend. Shortly after the Korean War, the national air races were resumed. Originally held in Cleveland, Ohio before World War II, the trophy races were moved, primarily for safety reasons, to the Nevada desert country near Reno. As the focal point for the Reno Air Show, the races became popular events, and privately owned Mustangs have been consistent winners in the hot desert. Flyers bought surplus Mustangs and modified them for the rigors of high-speed, low-altitude racing. Even today, more than 40 years after the last Messerschmitt was blasted from the sky, the P-51 Mustang is the first choice of many successful air race pilots. Other groups, such as the Texas-based Confederate Air Force and private individuals, have purchased Mustangs for the purpose of restoring them to World War II condition. These men, in love with flying and drawn particularly to the warbirds, put on exciting exhibitions and eagerly display their planes to the public. Of the 15,000 Mustangs built, there are only approximately 100 still operational today. The owner of 2 of these P-51s is also the only current Mustang pilot to have flown a Mustang in combat. He is Captain Hess Bomberger, formerly of the 356th Fighter Group. His plane is nicknamed Vergeltungswaffe, a German word meaning revenge weapon. Hess Bomberger is part owner of Heritage Aircraft, which owns and flies 2 P-51 Mustangs. Vergeltungswaffe was purchased by Hess and his partner, Jimmy Hunt, in 1979 from race car driver Johnny Rutherford. Hess had the plane repainted to the specifications of his own original combat plane. All of the colors and insignia are authentic. Hess completed 284 combat hours and 66 missions. Now he makes a business of flying his beloved Vergeltungswaffe to air shows and exhibitions and has become one of the respected leaders in the warbird movement.
Joined in 42 and enlisted in 42 and finally graduated, commissioned in 44, in March of 44, and they sent me directly from commissioning out of AT-6s into P-47s, where I went through a replacement training unit at Abilene, Texas, and then overseas to an operational training unit at Atcham in England. And then I showed up in the 356th group, and they were flying P-47s then. And I flew, I think, about 100 hours of combat in the 47 before one day they showed up without us knowing anything about it. They showed up with about 40 brand new P-51s on the field. Ended up flying the last mission of the war, the last fighter mission flown by the 8th Air Force. Now, I own a company that has 2 of them. I have a partner that we own the company, and the company owns 2 51s. The one that's painted like the 356th, in fact, it's painted just as my airplane was painted. We got this one from Johnny Rutherford, the race driver. He owned it before we did. The name Vergeltungswaffe is the word the Germans used for the V-1 and V-2, the V-1 buzz bomb, the V-2 rocket. And that's what the V stood for, Vergeltungswaffe. It means retaliation weapon. And if you know your German, you can almost see the construction in there because the word Geld is in there, which means money, and Waffe, of course, is weapon. And the Vergeltung means to pay back, as in money, but it's a weapon to pay back or retaliation weapon. And the coat of arms is the coat of arms under which the first Bomberger of my Bombergers came over in 1700 and something. He came from Germany in the area near Heidelberg, and that was the barony. The town was called Eschelbronn, but the barony, the coat of arms is for the Baron von Bennigsen of that area. And you know, back in the old days, they used to fight under the banners of the Baron of the particular area. So when I got overseas, I thought, hey, I'll just put that crest on there, and I'm fighting under that coat of arms. Tremendous move now to get them back to the original. And this airplane is one of the few that has the K-14 sight in it, which we had in the 356 over in Europe. We're getting the bird ready to fly here, and we're going to do a lot of things that the crew chief normally would do when we were in combat. For instance, I'm going to check the fuel here because flying today, fuel has been put in improperly, put in jet fuel, and all I do is make sure that we've got avgas in there, and also as part of the pilot's responsibility to make sure he's got full tanks. And I'll look, see, make sure that the flap is in good shape, there aren't any bends or anything in it. All the time I'm looking at places, I'm looking at this here to make sure that it's properly latched, and now I'm checking the aileron, making sure the trim tab is where it should be. And the aileron is sealed. You can possibly hear the movement in there. There's a canvas seal in there to keep the pressure from up above meeting the pressure from down below. Makes the airplane much more controllable, much more maneuverable. Now I'll go right around the corner here, and still looking at the general skin, making sure it's okay. Check the light here, the light's okay. Walk right around here, looking at the leading edge, no dents or anything. When I get here, I'm going to look at my gear, make sure my tire is properly inflated and it hasn't slipped on the rim. I'll look at how far the oleo is extended. It should be about the width of the hand, 3 5/16 inches. This is a little bit high, but it'll go down as soon as we start flying or start moving. Make sure that the downlock pin is free, and we'll pull out. There's the main rod for the main gear actuator should be firm, so if the rod end is broken, it would fall free, and I'd know we couldn't fly the airplane. Of course, the light goes up when the gear comes up, but just make sure that it's free. Now I'm looking at everything in the gear, and this is all the mechanism for the gear up in here. There's all sorts of linkage. I can see the fuel switch up there, the fuel selector, and all of the linkage and piping for the gear. This actually is landing gear handled here. Make sure that it's okay, that there aren't any leaks up in there, hydraulic leaks and so on. There are lots of pulleys and lanyards and so on that I'll be looking at. But while I'm doing that, I'm just making sure that it is all in the proper shape. Now I'm looking to see that all of my cowling is properly fastened. I'm going to do something that normally, again, a crew chief would do. I'm going to check my stacks. They all ring the same. That means there's not a broken stack. Come around to the prop, look at the spinner, make sure it looks okay, and there's no movement in the prop that there shouldn't be. And I'd pull the prop through. Again, the crew chief would do this. You pull through 12 blades. Now I'll go look in this gear well. In this gear well, we have the accumulator for the hydraulic system, which has a charge of nitrogen in it to prevent water hammer effect in the hydraulic system. I make sure that it reads 400 pounds. That's 375 plus or minus, and 425. Again, more of the linkage for the gear. Make sure there are no leaks. Check this. This main gear actuator. Check this down lock. It's okay. Make sure that the cover is off your pitot. Again, the leading edge is okay. All of the wing surfaces look okay. Flight's okay. Aileron again, same deal. Free, working as it should. This trim tab doesn't move, that's fixed trim tab. Flap is firm. I'm going to check the flap linkage here, because if one of the flap links breaks, the airplane goes into a roll, uncontrollable, and probably into the ground, because you'd be doing it on the ground, is where you'd be, near to the ground, where you're putting the flap down. Putting the flaps down, I should say. Okay, now I'm checking to see where the scoop is. That's reasonable for today. Look at the inflation of the tail wheel, any slippage on the tail wheel tire. In general, the linkage. Back to the horizontal. Now I'm right here at this point, when the stick is neutral and the horizontal is neutral, is where the tail wheel steering is in effect. Goes 6 degrees either side. It's got a big pulley effect in there, so that when the rudder goes maybe 10-15 degrees, it'll just go 6 degrees. But as soon as the stick goes forward this much, the elevator goes down. Now the tail wheel is full swiveling, and you can kick it around to the brakes. But I'm checking to see that that's all free. The rudder here, I'll check to see if the rudder's free, and I don't hear anything in there that says I don't feel anything. We got a good rudder. This is the only tab on the airplane that's servoed. You can see it moving opposite to the control surface. The rest of them just move with the control surface, such as this one here on the elevator. Again, I'm looking at all of the surfaces as I go, make sure that there aren't any dents, any bends, or anything like that. Check this side of the tail wheel, it looks okay. Tail wheel door is free. Scoop. I'm going to hit this flap rod in there. It's good and solid. And we've done it. We can take off.
John Dilley of Fort Wayne, Indiana, is an avid air racer and has been a pilot for more than 25 years. He and his partner, Tom Kelly, own and race Lou 4, 1981 and 84 silver class champion at Reno. Dilley's P-51 is named after the wife of a former Mustang pilot, and the plane bears the colors of the 361st Fighter Group. John also operates Fort Wayne Air Service, a job which provides him with the opportunity to fly his P-51 almost whenever he wants to.
Well, it's actually pretty hard to describe how P-51 feels. I don't have any good examples, but it seems to have the right touch, the right feel. A roll can be done so very smoothly. It gets a little heavy on the controls at high speeds, but under normal operation, it's just like flying around in a little J3 Cub, only you're just going a whole lot faster. I enjoy it very much. I've been doing that for 25 years, I guess, now, so I have a fairly good feel on what it feels like to fly the airplane. But it's something that I can go do for 20 minutes after I get frustrated in the office and come out feeling like a whole new person. Usually go to 100 mile an hour and start to rotate. Top speed straight and level, 25,000 feet, 432. Well, I keep up at least 150 mile an hour around on final, then gradually start to slow down. Come across the fence at 120, 25, and then just pull the power on back and let her slow on down and touch down probably. I make mostly wheel landings. I touch down about 90, 92 indicated. Once you get into a race, actually it's just like anything else, I guess. An hour before the race, you've got butterflies, and you wonder why in the world you're doing anything so crazy like this or like air racing. And once you get the engine started, fired up, and going out and join up in the formation and getting started, it just, you forget about. Butterflies go away, and it's all competition, and I guess that's the only way you could be competitive. I like to be out in front, of course, and it makes it a lot easier course. It's a shorter course because anytime you have to pass, it has to be done on the outside. Technique to flying the aircraft, the smoother it is, the faster it's going to go. It's just like any aircraft. When you tighten up the turn, it's just like putting on the brakes. Basically, that's what air racing is. And we average probably 4 to 5 Gs in most of the turns.
While the Mustang is considered to be the top of the line by most air racers, the quest for greater speed has led to some exciting modifications to Dutch Kindelberger's original design. Perhaps the most radical of these is Dilley's Vendetta, shown here while still under construction. Born of midnight inspiration, Vendetta may be the racer's dream. Part Mustang, part Learjet, and all speed. With her, the Dilley team plans an assault sometime in 1988 on the world speed record, which is currently just under 500 miles per hour on a straight course. The North American P-51 Mustang was considered by most aviation experts to be the finest fighter plane of World War II. She was arguably the finest prop-driven fighter plane of all time. The Mustang has served honorably in every theater of the war and in Korea. Every American ally has used Mustangs at one time or another. Today, the 100 or so remaining Mustangs race or fly exhibitions at air shows. They serve as reminders of a powerful time in America's history, a time when the forces of freedom fought to the death against the forces of tyranny. For many, the North American P-51 Mustang represents the best of America's efforts. There was the ingenuity of those who built her, the resourcefulness of those who maintained her, and there was the undaunted skill and courage of the men who flew her against the enemy and won. Sleek, fast, fearless, and armed to the teeth. In 1944 and 45, none were better than the P-51 Mustang.